The Mattapoisett Museum is located about 30 miles to the southeast of Taunton, a 35-minute trip down Route 140. Mattapoisett was incorporated as a town in 1857. Prior to that, it was a village within the town of Rochester, which was established as part of Plymouth Colony in 1679. The museum is made up of a historic 1821 church and meeting house, as well as an addition of a replica carriage house that holds and exhibits much of the museum's collection.
My name is Kyle Carey. I'm the president of the board. The Mattapoisett Museum was originally founded as the Mattapoisett Historical Society in 1958. They didn't have a home for it. The church here in Mattapoisett wasn't active, so this worked out great because they needed somebody at the church, the museum needed, or the historical society needed to have a home. So they struck this deal in 1959 and the historical society moved in. We currently rent the space from the church. We pay a dollar annually for the building, and we pay $1 annually for the land of which the carriage house sits on. So in about 10 years later, 1968, they were running out of space here at the museum. So they got together and worked with the church trustees to lease the land in the back to build a replica carriage house. And they built this big structure for their collections. The building was built in 1821. It was originally a Baptist church. It went through some changes over the years, but by the late 1950s, it wasn't very active. The pulpit is actually a reproduction. It was done around 1962. They still do the services here. They use the pulpit for that. The pews in the church, they're original. A few years ago, we rebranded as the Mattapoisett Museum. We started to expand our offerings into visual and performing arts, and at that time we developed a new mission statement. We want to become a more inclusive organization, and I'll read that mission statement. The Mattapoisett Museum is a vibrant place of learning and community activities. We collaborate and partner with surrounding communities to provide a place of learning and sharing. We collect, maintain, and make available for use cultural and historical materials relating to Mattapoisett heritage. We create a welcoming place for all people of all ages.
Hi, my name is Jessica Carey. I'm Kyle's wife. I'm also on the board. I manage the museum's social media, their website. I'm head of the program committee, the events committee, volunteer coordinator. So as far as programming goes, we try to have at least one history-focused program per month. We have silent movie night the first Friday of every month, which it's set to live music. So we've collaborated with a music teacher who lives in town. His name's Jeff Angeli, and he has his own business. It's called South Coast Lessons. So he works with his students, and then they provide the music for silent movie night. It's usually like string instruments, guitar, fiddle, and then we have open mic night, which is open to anybody, all ages, all genres. You can come in, read a poem, sing a song, do a dance. That's the third Friday of every month. And then we have old time fiddle session, which is fourth Sunday of every month. So it's just string musicians. They just come in with their instruments and they sit up front for 2.5 hours and just play music, and it's just a great community gathering. It's a come and go. It's totally free. You can come bring snacks or spend the whole afternoon if you want. Something that we started last year, which was a really huge success, we got volunteers from the high school drama club, and we took local lore stories and they acted them out for the kids. We did a scavenger hunt in the carriage house, which was a lot of fun. So I think that's something, as long as we have the interest and the volunteers that want to do it, we'll definitely continue with that because we got a lot of good feedback.
So this is we call it the Ashley Mural. It's official title, as he titled it, I guess, is a chart of the Whale Coast of New England, circa 1810. It was painted in by Clifford Warren Ashley in 1919. And so it was painted for a friend of his, Gilbert Hinsdale, who lived here in Mattapoisett, down at 20 Water Street along the water. And Gilbert Hinsdale commissioned Ashley to paint this mural for his sunroom that sort of overlooked the harbor down here. And it's about 16 feet wide, and I believe about 6 feet tall. And as you can see, it shows this whole sort of coast of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut. And it includes, I forget the number, but it includes a whole bunch of sort of little illustrations that he added, little flavor. So a lot of the little towns have a little drawing that represents something about that town or that region. Here in Mattapoisett, if you look closely, you can see there's ships being built, ships on stocks that are being built because we have a shipbuilding thing here. There's even a representation of the fishing, the herring weir, that was a big thing in town at one point. Clifford Warren Ashley was born in New Bedford towards the end of the whaling era. And I think this mural kind of represents him looking back at 1810 when the whaling era, when whaling was a big business. In a way, maybe romanticizing it. So in the sunroom, there were windows, a big bank of windows, and Gilbert Hinsdale also had a collection of whaling artifacts, paraphernalia, harpoons and that kind of stuff, a lot of which went to the Whaling Museum eventually. And this mural was actually on the ceiling, so it would have a flat ceiling, and then towards the windows it sloped down. So this mural is probably the size it is because it fit on that sloping part of the ceiling.
So Hebe is a wooden sculpture. She was hanging on the backside of a house in Mattapoisett, 20 Water Street. The family that donated her is also the same family that owned the mural. So we don't really know her story before the family owned her, but we can imagine that she was a ship's maidenhead. If you look at her closely, she models exactly a statue that was carved by an Italian sculptor, Antonio Canova, in marble. So it's really interesting if you look at the marble sculpture and then you look at this one. They're very, very similar. Hebe is the goddess of youth, the cupbearer of the gods. She was the daughter of Zeus and Hera. And if you drink from her chalice, she restores you to your youth.
I'm Jeffrey Miller. I'm the director/curator of the Mattapoisett Museum. All right, so this is the Mendel Gallery. Mattapoisett is known for many things, obviously, but largely for being a big shipbuilding port in the 18th and 19th centuries. The shipyards go back into the 1700s. We don't know much about them at that time. I believe in the 1750s, there were shipyards, or at least one or two, up along the Mattapoisett River. So they would build them up the river and then float them down. But where it really took off was in the sort of middle of the 19th century. So 1820s to 1860s. And at that point, at that time, in the 1820s at least, there were, I believe, at least 7 or 8 shipyards. And this time they were down by the bay, so right along the water. And they were building these, all sorts of ships really. They built whale ships. The whale ships get a lot of attention. Really, the majority of the ships they were building were merchant vessels. Small, I mean, still big, but not the size of whale ships. And that period really sort of shaped the fabric of, at least in this area of Mattapoisett. So this area is kind of now known as the village. And so with those shipyards down there building these ships, there were over, in the 19th century, I think there were at least 300 ships built here. So at that time, you know, this would have been a really bustling, industrious area. And so a lot of the houses here that are now in the village go back to that time. There would have been several hundred men working in the shipyards every day. It would have been loud and messy. These ships would have probably towered above the houses here. They would have been up on stocks. And so, that's still, you can still sort of see the influence of those shipbuilding years here. Our local paper, for example, is called The Wanderer. And the reason it's called The Wanderer is because the Wanderer, which we have a model of here, was the last ship to be built in those shipyards. It's quite well known around here because it came back to New Bedford in the 1920s. It actually was caught in a storm and wrecked off the coast of Cuttyhunk. So it got blown ashore, it got stuck, and it got battered by the waves. It was evacuated and it sat there for several months, I believe. During that time, it was looted and parts of it were scattered to the four winds, I suppose. And so that was the fate of the Wanderer. And we have, in the carriage house here, we have the mast, one of the masts. It was a bark. So as you can see, it has 3 masts. We have the mizzen mast, actually. Actually, it's I keep correcting myself. It's a section of the mizzen mast. This mast was huge. The scale of these ships is hard to understand, right? And that section of the mizzen mast was actually used as the flagpole down in Shipyard Park, which is along the water, which is where these ships were built. I believe it was put in there in the 1970s and used as a flagpole for many years until, unfortunately, it got struck by lightning twice. At which point it was taken down, replaced by a modern flagpole, and we have the section here in the carriage house. The way these ships were built is they would start with 2 basically extremely long sections of live oak that they could only get from down in the southern part of the southern states. And that was the only thing that would really grow long enough and straight enough to do these long sections that make the middle of the hull. And they would use 2 of those basically strapped together, and then they would build the planks, the parts that go this way. Mostly out of yellow pine, which I believe they brought down from Maine. And they would hammer those on with these sort of brass or bronze spikes. And then they would put a plug, so they'd hammer these in and then they put a plug over it. And then once all that was done, they would go around and hammer in what was called oakum, which is basically just a fiber. It's like if you took a piece of rope and just pulled it apart. And then I think a lot of times they sort of mixed it with some sort of tar or something. And they would use a hammer, a special hammer, caulking hammer here, to hammer that into all the gaps. And that was basically the way they sort of waterproofed these boats before, the development of sort of modern chemical waterproofing solutions. Yeah, we've got some ship's logs here. We have quite a collection of ship's logs, actually. These ones on display at the moment. Let's see, this is the Brig Herald out of Marion, 1865 to 1866. And, this is where all the records of what goes on in these long whaling voyages would be kept. So these ships were out for sometimes 3 years at a time, before coming back to port. So these kind of logbooks are really the only way we know what was going on, right? A lot of times they have little, as you can see, little illustrations. So a lot of times they will mark if they see another boat. That's why you see little pictures of boats here, and they will write down if they know which boat it is. They often would mark if they caught a whale. That's what this stamp is. They would stamp the whale if they bagged one, I guess. If they sighted a whale, or chased one, or maybe harpooned it but it got away, they would just put the tail. So they would use the stamp, but they would just put the tail of the whale. This is some of our sort of maritime crafts from the collection. Mattapoisett being a waterfront town, and with the shipbuilding and everything, particularly in the 19th century, A lot of Mattapoisett's youth, men, of course we're talking men, would go off on ships, would go off on whaling voyages or, some sort of voyages, and be gone and go all around the world, and then oftentimes come back to home, back to Mattapoisett. And a lot of times they would either have brought stuff back, or in some cases they would make stuff on their voyages. They would have scrimshaw or carving, was a popular way to sort of pass the time when you're at sea for 3 years at a time. You need something to do, right? So here we have examples of a swift, which was used to wind yarn. I think a very popular thing to bring home, maybe to your sweetheart. Same thing with these sailors' valentines. So these sailors' valentines, I think, were popular things to bring back to a girlfriend or wife or whatever back home, as a sort of souvenir or a gift. I think in some cases sailors would actually make these. I think in a lot of cases they would purchase them from the sort of indigenous peoples of these islands and other places that they were visiting. So I think this one was likely made in Barbados, but we can't really say for sure. Scrimshaw, again, as I mentioned, was a very popular pastime, something to keep you busy on these long voyages. We've got examples of some of the sort of common things to make, like playing pieces, game pieces, carvings. This was a whale tooth. A lot of times there are whale teeth that they've carved and inked very. Some of these people were amazing. Some of the artistry is really incredible. So this is a tracer lathe, and it was used to make axe handles. So you would, basically these things on the wall, they're metal templates for different shapes of axe handle. And you load it into the machine and put a wooden block, or I don't know what you call it, plank, in here, and it would basically perfectly replicate the shape of the axe handle that you're trying to make. And this was designed and made by a guy called Ellis Bowles. And he had a workshop. It's way up at the north end of town. And he got an interesting nickname because he had a daughter who was taking dancing lessons down here in town, in the village sort of section. And at the end of the series of lessons, I don't know how long the course was, he showed up to pay with an armful of axe handles. And then that was how he paid for his daughter's dancing lessons. And supposedly from then on, he was known as Axe Handle Bowles. The forge that was also in that same workshop over here. Yeah, so this was basically dismantled at the site of his workshop and brought down here and then reconstructed. So this is a model of a Saltworks. Salt making at one point was a very important industry all along the coast of Massachusetts, because it was very expensive to import salt from Europe. And so what they would do is they would build these sort of salt works. This is a scale model. I believe these vats would have been, was it 16 feet by 16 feet, something like that. And what they would do, the way it worked, is you would have a pump with a windmill or something, and it would pump seawater into the highest of these vats. This is the one in the back there. And then they would let it evaporate until a certain point, at which point they would send it down the little sluice there into the next lower vat. And they would let it evaporate there, and so on, all the way down the line. And each time they did that, it would leave behind different inclusions. So it would leave behind more material that they don't want in the salt. until you get down to the bottom one where they would let the water evaporate fully and finally have basically pure salt. And so that's how they were making salt from the seawater without getting all of these undesirable minerals and that kind of thing. And what's kind of neat is you have these sort of pyramid-shaped lids. And the reason they're on this sort of twirly thing is because when the weather was good, they would turn this to uncover the vats so that they could evaporate. And then if the proprietor or owner or whatever thought that there was a storm coming and thought it was going to rain, they don't want to get the water in there. So they would come and turn these covers back. Salt making, like I said, was a big industry all around the coast. It eventually only really died out when salt mines were discovered, and it was a lot easier to just dig it up.
So this right here, we have a barbershop pole, which was originally on the barbershop of a man named Abraham Skidmore. Now, Abraham Skidmore was a black man that came to Mattapoisett around 1900. He was a son of formerly enslaved people. He was born in 1878 in North Carolina. He came up to New York in the late 1890s. It turns out his mother had come up with him as well. I found his father stayed behind in North Carolina. I found he had been arrested at one point for stealing a horse, and he had been in prison. Right? And so the family, most of Abraham's brothers and sisters, moved to New York, and Abraham came up here to Mattapoisett around 1900. But he actually stopped in New Bedford on the way. He lived there for a couple of years, had a barbershop, and then came to Mattapoisett. He had a couple different locations as barbershop. His last one being on Church Street near Center School, where it is still a barbershop today. So after Abraham was the barber there, he died in 1954. A man named Al Morgado bought the barbershop and continued cutting hair. And so his son, Dick Morgado, donated this to us about 10, 12 years ago, which is nice to have. But Abraham Skidmore, he was really popular with the kids in town. He did so much for the school children. He would do parades, he would organize events for them. One of the things that I found that he actually started that still goes on today is we do a Halloween parade in town, and it always starts in front of the barber shop. Whoever's the barber that runs the shop always leads it with a drum. We still have Jody Bauer. She's on the select board here in town. She's also on our board. She runs the barbershop there. She leads the parade with her drum. That's where he started in 1949, just doing that same thing. There's a parade, it goes through a path around town, and then ends at the school where there's a nice costume contest. I've also been trying to look more into his wife. She was politically involved in organizations in New York promoting suffrage and race-related issues.
This is the town hall sign from the town hall here in Mattapoisett. All the papers on it are the original papers from 1939 and 1940. And so, as you can see, there's stuff about draft and that kind of thing. And the reason that it was preserved that way, the story behind it, as I'm told, is that in 1940, I believe, the New York Yacht Club does an annual sort of sail around the area. And they came into town, and apparently there was a bit of a rivalry between the New York Yacht Club and some of the yacht clubs here in Mattapoisett, Marion, this region. And some of the people who had sailed into town came to Mattapoisett and had a good time, went out to the local establishments, and they thought it would be funny to take the town hall sign and sail off with it, and that's exactly what they did. So it disappeared sometime in 1940, and it was kept, from what I understand, in an attic somewhere, I believe in New York. Just as it was, I believe they were probably too embarrassed to come back in the morning and be like, hey, we took your town hall sign. So they just kept it and sailed away with it. And about 60 years later, I think it was the early 2000s, the family that had it in their attic contacted us and said, we have this weird sign in our attic that seems to be from Mattapoisett. Would you be interested? So we said, sure, yep, and that's how it came to be here. There is a poem, yeah, that's what this thing is. On the coast of Maine, where the icebergs float, we sailed the sea in a little boat. The water was cold and the wind did veer, but nary touched we of rum or beer, until Cape Cod behind us lay, and we hove in sight of a little bay. We rounded up, and the rum we hoisted off a town called Mattapoisett. With the rum we forgot the Gulf of Maine, but that town will never look the same. We beat on cars, we knocked down bars, we left the town in a shambles. We crawled in grass, broke bowls of glass, got tangled up in brambles. As we lurched through swinging doors, we thought of you, dear Commodore, so we tore off the front of the city hall. With many a rum-soaked heave and haul, we carried it down those winding streets, jibing round corners with started sheets. We rode it out in a rolling dink, half in the water and half in the drink. We lashed it over the forward hatch and used the head by the light of a match. We sailed it home 200 miles, blocking the deck and driving us wild. We brought it to the Connecticut shore and never want to see it no more. So the Trysail Club has done its duty. We ravaged the coast and brought home booty. This seagoing rum-soaked pair of lugs are known to you as Tom and Muggs.
So we have some research collections upstairs, and in those collections we have one of the things that I wanted to point out is we have these voter lists, and they're lists of people who are voting in Mattapoisett, right? And I don't know if these things were maybe hung at town hall but it's a list of all the voters. So we have this list of women voters, and it's dated October 23rd, 1920, which is when after the 19th Amendment was ratified. And this is the first bunch of women who could, from Mattapoisett, in Mattapoisett, that can now vote in national elections. We also have in our collections, we have a deed collection that goes back to colonial times. And it's interesting to see how they're dated and at the end of, when they're summing up the end of the deed, we have one here from set their hand and seals this 10th day of June, 1693, and in the 5th year of the reign of our sovereign Lord and Lady King William and Queen Mary. And then we have, in contrast to that, several years later, it ends with, I left my hand and seal this 10th day of October in 16th year of American independence, 1791. There are books that lay out the lands, and this one right here, dated April 19th, 1845, notes the land of Solomon's. And I've done a little research into that. In Solomon, I found like a brief news article stating that he was enslaved in New Jersey and had come up around 1800 to Fairhaven, which is next door to us. And he somehow either paid for his freedom or whatever it was, but he ended up settling in Mattapoisett. And for the longest time, I always heard references to Solomon's Cellar. I see in like old newspaper articles in like the 50s, like the Boy Scouts camped at Solomon's Cellars. It was this man's, it's where he lived. This was his house. This is all part of the stories that we want to be telling, that we need to be telling and focusing on.
Last summer we had a program. We collaborated with South Coast LGBTQ Plus Network. Eileen Dugas came and gave a talk about her new program, Elevating Youth, specifically geared towards LGBTQ teens. We also had a student from ORR High School who took over our Instagram last June for Pride Month, Alia Cozalito, and they gave a presentation, and it was, inspiring, insightful. Alia's parents are on the board for Tri-Town Against Racism, which is a group in the Tri-Town which came about in 2020 after George Floyd's murder. So it was kind of like serendipity, you know, everything kind of came into place, and I offered the museum as a place to do it, and then it kind of evolved from there. So we had Maggie Holland was the photographer that was in the audience that day, and we also have Janelle LaPointe, who both of them volunteered their time to take the portraits. Tri-Town Against Racism organized the forms and collected information for the families. So we did the photo shoots in 2 days, one weekend. So it was every 20 minutes a family came in, we did the photographs, and I have to say it was extremely heartwarming, eye-opening, and somehow it ended up a story. So many of the children in our exhibit were adopted. So there's a couple of same-sex couples with adopted children. There's, you know, single parents with adopted children. So it was just so amazing to just see all this love and all these families that chose to be together. Was just so heartwarming. So you'll see all around the gallery here, and each family wrote their own label. So however they wanted to present themselves. Some of them went into great depth, as you see down here, and some of them just have one sentence. So we're located at 5 Church Street in Mattapoisett. We are 1 street away from the ocean, so if you're here enjoying a beach day or eating at the inn at Shipyard Park, we're just a short walk from there. We're located very close to Town Hall and also the Congregational Church on Church Street, hence the name Church Street. We're about 5 miles from New Bedford, right off the highway. The Mattapoisett exit will take you basically right to our museum. We're kind of experimenting with our hours right now, so we're open 12 to 4, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We're hoping to be open more during the summer as long as we have volunteers. Our website, we're mattapoisettmuseum.org. Our Instagram is Mattapoisett Museum, and our Facebook is Mattapoisett Museum.
Oh, there's just so much. Like, there's just when I first came out, I was just blown away by the amount of history that's here.